I've been reading lots of stories from here, and I feel that I should share my very own experience with you all. It was something that made me change into who I am today. Some info before that. I'm a Brazilian guy, 20 years old today, but around 12 when this story happened. Just a normal school day. Boring subjects, annoying people, you know, the usual. I come from a good family, with somewhat good financial situations, so at the time I had with me a Motorola V3 cell phone, which was top tier back then. It was pretty uncommon for kids to have one. Every day after school, it would take a while for my father to pick me up with his car, which used to be a silver Mariva. It was also the same car that he used to drive me to school with. That being said, one day, I was waiting for my dad to pick me up, and I did so by playing some new Super Mario Bros. On my DS, which I of course took to school. That's when my cell phone rang, and I heard the voice of a somewhat cheery man saying, "Hey Pete, it's your Uncle Paul. I'm here to pick you up for your dad. Come outside." The man said, and I simply answered with okay and left through the gate. The thing is, it was still early. Way earlier than my dad usually picks me up. When I thought about that, I went back inside and waited for another call, and it came fast. "Where are you?" the man asked. I replied with, "Yeah, I don't see you out there." He sighed on the other side, giving me instructions. "I'm with the same blue Corolla that I dropped you today in the morning, Pete. Come on," he said, and hung up. He was getting impatient. My 12-year-old brain processed what was happening and connected the dots. The thing is, I had no uncles with a name that started with P. They were all AS. Also, it couldn't be my mom's brother because he's been dead for a long time now. Last thing was that no one called me Pete, an American nickname, but my family, those being my brother, sister, and parents. I started to get nervous and talked to my friends about it. After all, some of them were still there. Basically all they said was, "Yeah, tell him to go fuck himself." Now, I'm not one that likes to cuss, so I went to the principal for help. On the way there, the man calls again and I pick up. This time he was angry. "Why the fuck are you taking so long, you son of a bitch? Blue Corolla, are you brain dead? Get out here with that stupid video game of yours." And then he hung up. I instantly froze. Thoughts rushed through my head, such as, "They're trying to kidnap me. Is this real?" And so on. I started running to the principal's office. I was getting nervous, and I called my dad, who answered in a hurry. I took a deep breath to not seem scared. "Dad, did you by chance send someone named Paul here to pick me up?" I asked, my heart pounding to hear what I wanted, and that's what I got. "No. Whoever's calling you, don't go outside. I'll be right there," he said and hung up. I went inside the office bursting in tears, asking for someone to get the man that was probably out there waiting for me in a blue Corolla. I gave the teacher and the principal the number he was calling me from, and they called to no avail. I stayed in the office and got another call. This time I picked it up, and my hands were shaking, but I knew he couldn't harm me. "What's taking you so long, you little shit?" he screamed. "Listen, I know you're no uncle of mine. You have no idea which car I come to school in, and you're trying to kidnap me for whatever reason. I'm not going outside," I screamed. "Again," he said quietly. I screamed a what and called him sick and crazy. "You're not coming out again. You've been out. You just know better. Fuck you," he screamed before laughing like a maniac and hanging up. I held my phone in my hands and stared at nothingness for a while, until the teacher and the principal came back, saying that there was no such thing as a blue Corolla outside. Shortly after, my dad arrived, and I was escorted to a taxi with him and the guards. I sat there but did nothing, as my dad talked on the phone to track the number that had been calling, and find someone by the name of Paul. I took the rest of the week off school, and eventually I'd have nightmares about being outside school and getting grabbed. After this happened, I went back to school the next week and instantly joined the kendo club in order to know something about self-defense, especially if I got the chance to be armed with something. Years later, my mom and dad divorced. Saw that coming though. After all, when this episode happened, I was living with my older brothers because they didn't want to involve me in their fights. However, once I came back home with my mom, I found out that they divorced because my father had around 5 lovers in 5 different places, and one even called my mom saying, "You won. I tried everything to keep him for me, but you won." Or at least that's what my mother says. I wonder, could all this kidnap be part of a scheme from one of these lovers to steal my dad from us? If it was, then that just makes me uncomfortable to know that a human being is capable of probably killing a kid for whatever they want. Good thing is, today, that I'm 20, a teacher and a regional champion of kendo, and I've never heard of Paul ever again. But I still wonder what would have happened to me if I didn't have the decency to go back inside and keep looking for him. Okay, so I'm going to change some details in this story for the sake of anonymity. The events in this story actually fucked with my head a bit, and it took me a while to come to terms with it. About 10 years ago, I studied abroad. I had few friends in this new country, and was glad to find a house and a place to live with some cool people my age. I started hanging with this crew which became my friends, and we used to smoke a lot of weed. Things were pretty sweet. There was this one friend of my roommates, Frank, that came over to our place from time to time. I thought it was weird because he was like twice everybody's age. He was very intense as a person and made me feel slightly uncomfortable. The first time I met him, he seemed extremely suspicious of me and would ask me all kinds of questions to suss me out. But he had a good sense of humor and would always crack great jokes. In a way, he was kind of charming, and my roommates seemed to love him. Also, he always brought pizza. I asked one of my friends what the deal was with this guy, and he was like, "Oh, you don't know? Last year he found his wife and her brothers murdered in their flat. He's under investigation, but he didn't do it." I was taken aback by this. How could they really know he didn't do it? And why did they want to hang around with a potential psycho? I gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I certainly saw Frank in a new light now. Time went, and Frank came by our place almost daily. He was very clever and sly, manipulative. I got to know more about his background. He used to be in a gang when he was my age. He'd been in prison for most of the time in between then and now for violence. This didn't help me in trusting him. I couldn't believe how naive my roommates were to trust this man. Then the police went out and declared him a suspect. By now, this had become the biggest investigation ever in that particular area. He was interrogated but released for lack of evidence. Back home at our place, he would sit and talk about how he was a victim of a conspiracy, and all my friends would just nod and believe him. I felt crazy being the only one who didn't seem to believe anything. He must have sensed it, because he took me outside and asked me if I believed him. I said that yeah, sure I did, because by now I was really starting to get afraid of him. I asked him about the murders, and he told me his version of the event where, according to him, he found the bodies. It was gruesome, but I still had my doubts, and to my horror, he would crack jokes about the whole thing. Who in their right mind would joke about something like that? In my mind, only a complete psychopath. I started researching what a psychopath actually is, and learned that this guy fit every classical definition. I freaked out because I couldn't figure out what it was he really wanted from us. I started getting paranoid, and started believing that he actually planned on killing me and my roommates. I couldn't tell this to my roommates, because they were fully blinded by this guy's charades and trusted him completely. At one point, I even started sleeping with a knife in my bed. That's how scared I was that he was going to come and murder us like he murdered those poor souls. It was all around a horrible time for me, On top of that, the police had been tipped off about the relatively large amounts of weed being kept in the house and started raiding the place. 2 of my roommates were busted, and this marked the breakup of our collective. The day I moved out, Frank helped me with my stuff and looked at me, menacingly as I always found him. "You're all right," he said. "I actually planned on killing you, but you're pretty all right." I kid you not. He told me this. The others would laugh it off as a joke, but I saw it very differently. I was very glad to leave after hanging out with this murderer on and off for 1.5 years. Frank would be arrested shortly later, starting a huge trial that lasted several years. I found some new friends and found some normality in my life. That's when I realized how fucked up the whole situation was. I had been isolated with all this and had no one else to go to. A year later, I was back in my home country and followed the trial. All the craziness that surfaced about this man during the trial would convince me that I was probably right all along. He was proper mental and was convicted to 4 life sentences. He'll never be a free man again. I'm new to this Reddit, and this is my first post, but I've been reading a few of these stories for the past few days, and thought I could share one of my own. Hopefully it's creepy enough for you guys. It sure as hell was for me. This happened about a year ago. I was 22, and in my final year of college. I'd been living in a loft apartment that was the 3rd floor of a house. 2 other couples lived in the apartments below me. I lived just off campus in what's called a cusp neighborhood, which is basically a safer, more family-oriented area, which was a mix of some college students as well as old people and families. Since my apartment was on the 3rd floor, the door I used was around back with 2 flights of stairs going up to my apartment door. Also, my bedroom was at the front of the house with 2 big windows that faced the street. One night, I was coming back from working on my thesis with a classmate at her apartment. It was late, around midnight, and I drove down my street to find parking. I lived at a cul-de-sac with a dead end, so I turned around when I didn't see parking and decided to park on the main street that ran perpendicular to mine. I had done this many times before, and walked to my apartment late at night on multiple occasions and always felt safe. After I got out of the car and pulled my 2 heavy bags out, I noticed a man standing in the street where mine began. He was about 40 feet away, and his face was sort of covered by shadow, but he was facing me, and I could tell he was staring at me. He seemed to be in his 30s, was wearing regular-looking clothes, and had a dog that looked to be a kind of beagle next to him. Normally, I would just shrug it off as some guy out walking his dog. No biggie. But I still had one of those really bad gut feelings that something was up with this guy, and here's why. First of all, he pretty much seemed to appear out of nowhere. I had been driving down my street and didn't see anyone, nor did I see anyone up or down the street I parked on, and I was actively looking around for a parking space, so I would have seen someone walking down the street. Second, he was just standing there, facing me. And if he were walking his dog, shouldn't he be doing the obvious? Like walking? Then the last thing, that to me was the creepiest, was that he was standing in the middle of the street. Not by one of the sidewalks on either side, but smack in the middle, like he was trying to block it off. I fumbled for my keys to lock my car, and noticed him still standing there staring. I knew I had to walk by him to get to my apartment, so I was starting to get pretty creeped out at this point. Not to mention his dog was just as frozen as he was, not moving and also staring at me. I sort of half smiled in his direction and said hello pretty loudly, trying to show confidence and that I wasn't scared of him. I started walking as far to the left of the street as I could, on the side that my house was on, making sure my house key was ready to go unlock the door quickly. My house was 4 houses down from the top of the street, and there's a small street lamp in front of my neighbor's house that kept it from being totally dark. The man hadn't said anything in return, and I was avoiding eye contact, trying to look straight ahead. Something possessed me to glance at him, and I wish I hadn't. When I looked to my right, he was grinning at me, this really sinister-looking grin. The only thing moving was his head as he tried to follow me. I snapped my head back and increased my speed, trying to mentally locate where my phone was in my bag if I had to call 911. When I got to my house, I turned left to take the little path leading to where my door was, and quickly glanced back to see if he was following me. He was directly under my neighbor's street lamp like a spotlight about 15 feet from me, just standing there with his frozen dog still staring and smiling. At this point, I just bolted to my door. It was not well lit by any means, and I couldn't see whether or not he was going to follow me to the door. I unlocked it as fast as I could, slammed it behind me, and deadbolted it shut. I turned off the stairlight because I didn't want him to see me through the window at the second-floor landing and know which floor I lived on. I fumbled up the stairs to my apartment door, unlocked that, and turned off all the lights in my apartment. I crept into my bedroom. Thank God I had drawn the blinds before I left, and made a little hole in them with my fingers to look outside. Much to my horror, he was standing in the middle of the street again, directly in front of my house, looking up at my window, still smiling and this time waving. I freaked out and grabbed my phone from my bag and called my dad. I was in hysterics, telling him what was happening. He told me to calm down, make sure all my doors and windows were locked, and to call campus PD. I called the campus police, and this time much more calmly explained my ordeal. By this time, I felt safe enough to look out the window again and didn't see him. They eventually came after about half an hour, took my statement, and searched for the guy, who of course they never found. They did say, however, that there were boot prints in the dirt by my back door, as well as the same prints in the side garden of my neighbors who lived on the first floor. The garden was on the other side of my house, right under one of their windows. Needless to say, I made sure both my first and second floor neighbors were warned about this creep. The thing that creeps me out the most is that I never saw him actually walk anywhere. It seemed like he just appeared. I never heard footsteps or any indication he had moved closer to me, and every time I saw him, he was just standing there with his dog, who wasn't moving either. Not a sound from either of them. That smile still gives me shivers. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a story you'd like to share, or you just like to chat sometime, go ahead and take a look in the description below. There will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to include your story in a video or respond to your message as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, what the theme is if it has any, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in this video, that is always listed in the description below, by name in the order which it appears in the video, and I'll also have links to the artists as well, if you'd like to check out more of their work. So if you're curious about the music, go ahead and check down there in the description. Last but not least, if you guys have any constructive criticism, please be sure to let me know in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.